So here we have the penultimate drawer. This is all equipment I have for building and tuning motors. This thing here is a low oil pressure fuel pump shutoff switch, and I made this for both road racing and sprint cars. When the engine stops, like in a flip or a crash or whatever, when the motor stops, you lose oil pressure. The oil pressure, or lack thereof, cuts the switch and then automatically turns off your electric fuel pump. So say you're upside down, which is not good, I know. If you can't get to the engine shutoff switch, but the engine dies, and it usually does when you flip, then you know you're not going to be pumping raw fuel into the crash site. The next thing I have is well, this one is made by Speedway. My first one, which I gave away to a friend, is a air density meter. And when I was racing the Cobra, the Dragon Snake, we kept one of these with us all the time, and by reading this we would know what jets to use. So this takes into effect the ambient temperature and the pressure at whatever height you are. When we would dyno tune a motor, I would always put this density meter in the dyno room. So if there was any variation between what came on the chart and what showed on my meter, I would know how much difference there was, and I could make that calculation when rejetting a motor. All of these things are for setting valves and for setting your spark timing. This is for a V8, so you would mark number 1, usually one right after the clip, so you could bring your rotor around when it was setting on top dead center at number 1. Then you could adjust the valves on that, or you could bring it up, set your static timing 8 to 10, 12 degrees before top dead center, set that on there, and then use a light. Let me see if I can find that real quick. You can attach this to your coil, your hot lead, and put that one on the coil, and then you turn the distributor until the light goes out, and you know that your points are breaking exactly where you have it set on the damper. So it's much more effective, much cleaner than using a timing light. So I have these things for all sorts of different motors. This is that wrench that I made in 1969 for changing spark plugs on the Ford fork hammer, and I'll get into this a little bit in more depth a little bit later. I have spark plug wrenches for both front distributor like on the Ford and rear distributors like on the Chrysler and GMC or General Motors. So these are excellent for adjusting the timing on your distributor. A unison. This is used for setting Webers, if you have, or any multiple carburetors. Actually, I have another adapter, so I can use this particular piece on setting up a set of dual quads. So if you have a side draft, you can turn that up like that and adjust a side draft carburetor, set it like that, and you can do a downdraft. So this is excellent for getting multiple carburetors tuned at idle. Or sometimes if you have three, you'll shut the two end ones off and have your idle only in the front one. And by turning this, you can vary the height of the little red bubble. This is a real neat tool that I made way back, and this is the diameter of a Ford distributor. So I can slide that down in there, just clamp it in the vise, and then I can change the fly weights or readjust where I want the points to open on the cam. These things are pretty neat. You put one of these in each corner for your oil pan, slide your gasket up over it, and this little ridge here keeps it in place, and then you can slide your whole pan up and it keeps it aligned, two in the front, two in the rear. Your pan is just hanging there. You can push up, get a couple of bolts started, and then with a screwdriver if needed. Usually these come out by hand. That's a good way to align an oil pan without messing up the gasket. Here are brackets. Now these are store-bought, as you can see. Different ways of picking a motor up when you're wanting to either work on it or put a bigger one in. This one here is for the small block Ford 289 type 302. This is pretty much universal, and I have one of these and I've never found the second one, so I can only pull half a motor with that. This is for priming the oil pump. When you build a motor, you get the whole bottom end in, your oil pump, oil sump, put oil in the pan, slide this down into the distributor place. It has the hex here. You line up the oil pump drive. You can put a drill on here and spin it until you get oil pressure. That way you're not starting the motor on a with dry bearings. This here I made for dialing in a cam. You put that in the spark plug hole, pull this down, put your piston on top dead center, pull this down until you feel it just touch the top of the piston. Then you turn the motor backwards until it touches again. Then you can line up your degree wheel. Once you get your crank on 0, then you can start degreeing in your cam. This is just an old Raja clip, and with this little wire you can put your timing light on here and still be connected to the spark plug. And yes, I made this all by myself. Ring groover, cleaner, ring groove cleaner. You can take your rings off. This little area here goes into the groove. You tighten it down, and then there are several different sizes here, so you can clean the lands or the grooves out before you put your new rings in. Methylate that you put in your alcohol for when you're taking a measurement of your chambers. You take and put some Vaseline around. I lost my 2 barrettes. I had 2 barrettes for checking volume when I sold a car. They were in the trunk and I forgot about them. So anyhow, you stick this down over the head, mix up some mercurochrome or methylate so you can see the color. It changes from a clear liquid to kind of a pinkish, and you can watch it until the bubble reaches here, and then you measure the volume of your chamber in the head. This one is setting your needle and seat depth, and this one for the float height on a holly, and this one is for setting the float height on a Weber downdraft. These gauges are for setting, or not, well, yeah, I guess you are setting the spacers for your spring. You check the spring pressure on each of your valve springs, and then you measure from the seat of the spring to where the keeper goes, and you can make an adjustment with your shims so all of the valves have exactly the same seat pressure. So those are a pretty neat kind of deal. That's for putting the cross hatches after you bore and hone a cylinder. You can put some medium to coarse sandpaper on here, emery cloth, and put a nice cross hatch on the cylinder walls. These are ring compressors. By using these pliers, you just squeeze that, different size pistons. This is the early style ring compressors. I have it for both the flat head and the larger pistons. A cylinder hone. If you noticed up in one of the other drawers, I had a 2-stone and a 3-stone hone. This is a 3-stone hone for cylinders. Here's a gasket scraper. I doubt you've ever seen anything like that. With this thing slid all the way, these are very stiff for scraping the head or the deck of the motor. Slide these back and they'll accept a variation in shape. These are for the keepers on a flathead, where the valve is in the block. These two, when I put a set of cylinder heads on, I put the gasket on, and then I hooked these two over where the manifold would go. And then I can set my head down on this, but they're thin enough that the two oil returns still line up, those little bushings. So I can put a couple of bolts in, slide these out, and that way I don't mess up a head gasket by dropping a head or dinging them in any way. This is for removing your valve keepers. If you need to change your spring, put that on the pivot where the rocker arm would go, pull down on it. You can take your keepers out and pull the spring, well, the retainer and spring, but you have to make sure that that piston is up. I think everybody knows what a valve spring depressor is. I'm not even going to show that one. Snap-on torque wrench, invaluable piece of equipment right there. This piece is of my own design. When you start to pull a motor, if you put your chain across the heads, say left front, right rear, you're always messing up your valve covers. But by putting this on, just take a nut off, put it through the chain, same thing here, and this saves your valve covers. Now we can return to this. Back in '69, I was Sam Posey's mechanic when I worked for STP Corporation, and he had a flat crank Plymouth in his Lotus, and the spark plugs came out in a conventional manner, so you always had to use a spark plug wrench on those. But in the winter of '69, we got a McNamara in that Mario Andretti was going to be driving, and it had a four-cammer in it, a Ford cam. And I noticed that the spark plugs were just looking right straight at me. So I said, why not figure this out? I took a torque wrench and tightened a spark plug in there, and then figured out how long this handle needed to be to give just a slight amount of pressure, and I was at the right amount of torque. This shaft was so I didn't have to bend over. This is a proto wobbler. This is when the impact ball wobblers just came out. So I bought one of these, cut the end off where you would put your 3/8 drive wrench and then cut the bolt. Well, this is for a 3/8, so I cut this end off, got a proto spark plug wrench with the rubber inside, and welded that all together. And the spark plug, or the snap-on man, came into the shop a couple of times while I was using this. And in 1973, I opened a shop in Venice, and when the snap-on man came into my shop, I went out to the truck and I saw the very first one of these on his truck. So I was ahead of my time, or he told somebody about what he had seen, and Snap-on came out with a wrench almost the same, well, the same as this one. So this concludes the engine building drawer. The next one down will be the last one, and it just has several tools in it that I have built over the years.